we'll move on to our last section, the sixth and the last section of our day. I would like to request the chairpersons to unmute the mic, switch on the camera, starting with Dr. Muralidhar NS, Dr. Deepak Agarwal, and Dr. Kim Ramasamy. I would also like to welcome our moderator for this section, Dr. Saurav Sinha. Over to the chairperson.
Right. Mundi sir is there?
No, sir.
NS Mundidhar sir?
No, sir. Muralidhar is not there, sir, right now.
And Dr. Kim sir? Dr. Kim sir?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm there. I'm just.
Sir, welcome. Sir, welcome. Welcome.
Thank
Vanakkam,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Kim sir is, of course, one of the most well-known ophthalmologists, and sir is a senior retinal surgeon at the Arvind Eye Care System. To me, more importantly, sir is a very, very important pioneer in diabetic retinopathy teleophthalmology, and sir's keen interest and knowledge is paramount, and I think he's one of the leaders in the country today for that. And sir, hats off to you for your immense contribution to that, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Deepak Agarwal is a young ophthalmologist, relatively young compared to us, at Patna. He also trained at your hospital itself, Arvind Eye Care System. Deepak does fantastic work at Patna. Dr. Mundidhar sir is right now not with us. He might join us. He's a very senior retinal surgeon at Retina Institute of Karnataka. They have a great group practice in Bangalore. And 25 years ago, also when I was doing my PG, they were doing great jobs at that time. I welcome all of you for the session, sir. With your permission, Dr. Kim, we'll start off with Dr. Somo Basu. Is
Yes,
Dr. Basu
please.
there? Can you share your slide, please? Is Dr. Basu there?
Near Basu.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Basu is the head of uveitis services at WPI Network, and he's also the DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance Fellow at WPI Prasad Institute at Hyderabad. Dr. Basu, please, for the first talk on flare and cells, first post-op day. We are referring to only cataract surgery. And Dr. Basu, please.
Yeah, thank you. Is my slide visible?
Yes, sir.
You're
Please
audible
slide,
and
sir.
visible, sir.
Please
Yeah.
go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. And I've kept it very simple, as you had pointed out on the group earlier on. What do you do when you see flare and cells on the first post-op day? For the general audience here, let's be very clear that the idea is to ensure that is there an infection or there is no infection. That's the simple thing that we want to answer at that time. But before moving on, let's first see how do we look at cells in the antechamber. It has to be a 1 × 1 mm slit beam. The illumination has to be maximum, and as we know, the focus has to be posterior to the cornea if you want to look at the cells in the antechamber. For flare as well, the focus has to be posterior to the cornea. It's a small circular beam which has to be directed 45 to 60 degrees temporally into the pupil and in a very dark room. And you see the flare as a Tyndall effect. Now, since our main question is to distinguish the sterile inflammation, the toxic anterior segment syndrome from endophthalmitis, our evaluation starts with the history. And one of the things that we tend to forget, and I can say this since I see a fair number of uveitis patients, is to get a past history of uveitis in these patients. Many of them will tell you that they actually had uveitis, redness or pain, or used steroid drops prior to the cataract surgery. So that might tell you why this kind of worsening happened on the first post-op day. Then the issue of an eventful cataract surgery, of course, remains there. Any retained lens matter or postcapsular dehiscence with cortex in the vitreous cavity, all of these could lead to increased inflammation. Then finally, a cataract surgery in a patient with lens-induced uveitis will also mean increased risk of sterile inflammation post-operatively. So what tells you that it is sterile? The points that should tell that it is sterile is the absence of pain or fibrin in the antechamber, the absence of lid edema, which is paramount, and a decrease in cells and flare with topical steroid therapy if the patient is reviewed after 4 to 8 hours. So the toxic anterior segment syndrome typically presents within 24 to 48 hours. The pain is minimal. There are no posterior segment signs, as the name suggests. Hypopyon may or may not be present. The intraocular pressure may or may not be high. The edema is limbus to limbus. I think this is a point that we need to keep in mind. The corneal edema is from limbus to limbus, and there's a good response to intense topical steroids. The B scan might show a few vitreous echoes, but the retinochoroidal thickness is normal. That is very, very critical to note. The B scan might note some posteriorly dislocated nuclear piece in a patient with a hazy media. So when do we suspect infection? The red flags are the following. You will see lid edema, you will see a hypopyon, fibrin, and pain. All of these together should make you suspect that it's not sterile inflammation, it's an active infection. And in the B scan, though the B scan is only an adjuvant investigation, the diagnosis of infective endophthalmitis is still clinical. The B scan will show thickening of the retinochoroidal layer, and that would help you in reaching the diagnosis of infectious endophthalmitis. So you see the dot clumps and membranous echoes in the vitreous cavity, increased retinochoroidal thickness, and increased echoes in the inferior transverse scans. There would be hypoechoic clumps behind the posterior vitreous space in these patients. So in early endophthalmitis, if there are no echoes in the vitreous cavity and you still have a suspicion of infectious endophthalmitis, please increase the gain on the ultrasound machine and look at the vitreous cavity again. You will pick up the echoes in such a case. So the points to retain here, that firstly, we should remember how to look at the AC cells and the flare by using a 1 millimeter beam, and for the cells, and the conical oblique beam for the flare. A history of prior uveitis should not be ignored. Lens-induced uveitis and eventful cataract surgery should also be remembered for sterile inflammation. And think of infection if you see pain, lid edema, redness, hypopyon, and fibrin. The diagnosis of endophthalmitis is still clinical, and B scan is only an adjuvant investigation. Thank you for your attention. I'm done.
Thank you, Basu. I think that was an excellent, I think you once again proved that you are a good teacher. Very good way of presenting the basics. I think you brought out important points. I'm not sure Dr. Saurav is there, whether we have the time to discuss, or as before, are we going to move all the questions to the end?
What we'll do is we'll have the next talk also, Dr. Rajiv's talk. There we'll ask your comments on that.
Sure.
Dr. Basu, fantastic. Exactly what I wanted. Thank you so much. And I think he made the point.
Yeah, I mean, I remembered your message. So
he made this point twice. It's a clinical diagnosis, and ultrasound only is adjuvant. I want all journalists to understand that not having an ultrasound does not mean that you cannot diagnose endophthalmitis. We'll go on to Rajiv's talk. We'll come back to Dr. Kim after that, sir. And Rajiv, can you share a slide, please?
Yeah, I'll do that. Hi everyone.
Hi, Rajiv.
Rajiv is the director at Save Sight Center, Delhi. He has done his fellowship for Lalitprasad Prasad Eye Hospital and also the Sydney Eye Hospital. Dr. Rajiv, please.
Yeah, hope my screen is visible. I'm
you're audible. Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for having me here, Saurav. Thanks. Nice to see you, Dr. Ramse. Basu. So, distress call day 3 post-op. As we all of us know that endophthalmitis is a devastating complication of any intraocular surgery. And despite good surgery, we are faced with situations where quick decision can make a huge difference in visual outcome as well as saving the eye. Today, we will discuss what do we do when post-cataract surgery patient comes back with problems on 3rd day. What can it be? Patient can have marked anterior chamber reaction, corneal edema. They may have an infiltrate. They may have exudates, corneal circumcorneal congestion, chemosis, hypopyon, and total hypopyon. We may see a wound infiltrate along with the wound exudate, wound infiltrate going to the cornea, and hypopyon as well. Exudates over the IOL. So these are the things which are common. And in case there is a blebitis along with hypopyon. So whenever I see a patient like this, all of us always have different questions in our mind, whether this is endophthalmitis, whether this is sterile inflammation or toxic anterior shock syndrome, or whether it is lens-induced uveitis to some cortical remnants which are left post-surgery. So as what is our clinical approach to these situations? Patient comes with decrease of blood vision. I'm talking about these symptoms and signs because to an extent, these symptoms and signs make us differentiate between all these different entities and decide the future course. Patient may have decreased vision, blood vision, pain, redness, swelling of eyelids, discharge. Patient may say that there is a white area on the black part of the eye. They may be seeing black spots in front of their eyes. They may be having fever as well. And what we see as an ophthalmologist is the initial visual acuity, ocular motility. Eyelids may be swollen. Conjunctiva may show hyperemia, chemosis. There may be edematous cornea, opacification of the cornea, Descemet folds, keratin precipitates, infiltrates. And anterior chamber may be full of cells, flare, fibrinous exudates, and hypopyon. There may be membrane over the IOL. There may be vitritis, exudates, and fundus. Depending on the amount of inflammation, there may be absence of red reflex, and we might be able to see certain white lesions on the retina or choroid. Pressures may or may not be high. Here I would like to comment that according to EVA study, 95% of the patients who had endophthalmitis came with blurred vision. 82% patients had red eye. Excuse me, and 75% patient had pain. So it's important to remember that 25% patients who came with endophthalmitis, they did not have pain. This is very important point because a lot of patients, if they don't have pain, we tend to think about non-infectious endophthalmitis or inflammation. 15% of the patients in EVA study, they never had hypopyon, and only 26% of the patients had light perception vision. So without wasting time, I think I should go to next slides. Again, this brings me back to my initial slide. So on the third day, if all these symptoms are present, what should be the next step? Non-infectious inflammations or TAS, it typically occurs within 12 to 48 hours after the surgery, in contrast to infectious endophthalmitis, which is usually seen between 2 to 7 days. The predominant finding in these non-infectious uveitis and TAS is diffuse corneal haze. There may be anterior chamber reaction, which may be severe to moderate. There may be a spillover from anterior chamber into the vitreous, causing mild vitritis. Whatever the situation is, the important thing which we have to learn, which we have to do is, we should always have low threshold for vitreous tap and injection of antiseptics wherever we think that we might be dealing with endophthalmitis. And what we do whenever we have a condition like this is straight away go for anterior chamber tap, vitreous tap, and send the sample for microbiology. And along with that, we give intravitreal antibiotics plus minus steroids. Nowadays, we can send sample for PCR for quick diagnosis, and we are able to differentiate between a lot of organisms if we do a PCR test. Possibility of isolating an organism was 56 to 70% according to EVS, but nowadays with the good microbiological backup, our isolation rate is as 90%. Ultrasound helps, but it is not mandatory for the diagnosis and management. So friends, whenever you see, whenever in doubt, please go and inject. Ultrasound can wait, but the inflammation, the infection which is happening in the eye can have devastating complications. And the goal of the treatment is retention of useful vision, minimize the infection, limit the inflammation, and symptomatic relief. And I think, Dr. Saurabh, if you allow me to continue, or this, my important, I wanted to stress upon, if third day you have any doubt between inflammation and infection, are on the side of infection, to be on the safer side, do a tap, give injection. Don't wait for ultrasound or a colleague who can actually diagnose thing for you. It's always better to inject and then refer patient to a vitreoretina colleague. Shall I continue with the, because next slides only tells us about intravitreal injections, why we do intravitreal injections, what kind of combination can we do, and whether to use steroid or not.
I think we'll hold on over there. What we'll do is we'll ask Professor Dr. Kim, sir. Can you unshare a slide, Dr. Rajiv, please?
Yeah.
Dr. Saurabh, we'll go ahead with the discussions, I mean, the presentations, and then have the discussions like in the last session.
Right, sir.
That'd be helpful, because so everybody gets to make the presentations properly.
Yes, sir.
So thank you, sir. Dr. Chetan Rao, sir, can you share your slides, please? Dr. Chetan Rao?
Yeah, sir, I'm there.
Yeah, welcome, Chetan. Dr. Chetan is a senior consultant at Shankaratala in Chennai, and he is managing the retina emergency clinic there for the last 17 years. And his area of interest is mainly post-segment trauma and.
So good evening to all of you, and thanks to Dr. Saurabh for including me in this program. So I'm going to speak about upon a very important clinical condition, that is the post-operative 6-week. The patient comes with red eye and pain. So I think, yeah. So the ideal post-operative recovery, that is at around 4 to 6 weeks, the patient will have good vision. He'll have no perilumbal congestion. The cornea will be clear. The section is clear. A very quiet anterior chamber. No posterior synechia or pigments in the intraocular lens. The intraocular lens is centered in the bag with a clear posterior capsule and a clear antivitreous. However, if the patient comes to you around the 4th to 6th week when the steroid is being tapered, comes with a history of subnormal vision with ocular pain and redness as the steroid is reducing in frequency, these are signs of chronic inflammation. You will have a persistent limbal congestion. You may see keratic precipitates. There may be mild low-grade flare, cells, or even streak hypopyon. There could be, in some cases, a growth in the anterior chamber, posterior synechia, a plaque at the posterior capsule, and careful examination might reveal antivitreous cells or even diffuse vitreous haze. So a very similar thing can happen at the end of 6 weeks with a good post-op recovery. You may have a fibrous PCO, but this is not actually an infection, because there is no signs of inflammation, and it's just a fibrous plaque on the PC, and it is very diffuse. So just so what you have to basically look at, you have signs of persistent inflammation, which I just enumerated. You look for the source of inflammation in these cases. You might see a corneal abscess or a wound infiltrate. You might see antechamber mass. You might look for iris nodules, and you could look for posterior chamber plaque. And very importantly, you must dilate and re-examine the patient here, because you might want to look for non-infectious cause, which is retained lens matter in the angle or behind the iris. So what is chronic post-cataract surgery endophthalmitis? Usually seen after 6 weeks, and it presents as a persistent low-grade inflammation in the antechamber. Most of them will have decreased vision. They will have mild ocular pain, and almost 50% will have hypopyon. There will be a characteristic white plaque on the posterior lens capsule. Antivitreous human involvement is quite common. So, and there's a very high rate of recurrent inflammation despite hiking up the steroids repeatedly. So what is the pathophysiology of a chronic post-op infection? Classically, you will see that in the black IOL, a low virulent organism which is sequestered in the bag. It's usually associated with the antivitreous cells. There could be even string of beads in the antivitreous, which can be due to a fungal infection or a vitreous haze. And there's usually a dichotomous response to topical steroids. You will have, when you increase these corticosteroid, topical steroids, you will see a reduction of the anterior chamber cells and flare, but there's not much change in the vitreous reaction. And then you will see a recurrence of inflammation on decreasing the topical steroid frequency. So what are the most common organisms that we see? Most common organism which we suspect is the Propionibacteria acne, which is a commensal gram-positive bacilli. It's a low virulence organism. Characteristically, you will see a posterior capsule plaque. There is hypopion with granulomatous keratotic precipitates. And the other most common organism that you see is a coagulase negative gram-positive cocci, that is Staphylococcus epidermidis. Again, it's a low virulence organism, has characteristic biofilms, has fibrin capsules on the IOL, and vitritis. Very rarely you might just see fungal infection, and very rarely at around 6 weeks you will see a fluffy growth in the antechamber. Most often you will see it after many weeks to months later. But you must always keep that in mind. So what is the management for such a case? When you have signs of persistent inflammation with suspicious growth in the antechamber, it's always better to do an antechamber tap or a vitreous tap, and you do a gram staining, KOH mount, bacterial fungal culture, and polymer chain reaction for a eubacterian genome, P. acne, and pan fungal genome. However, if there is no visible growth in the antechamber and you see no vitreous reaction, you can always give a therapeutic topical steroid challenge, and you hike up the topical steroids, monitor the reaction periodically, pay careful attention to the antivitreous cells if there are any, and vitreous clarity. Note for recurring inflammation on tapering of steroids, and if it persists on tapering steroids or growth is seen, then consider AC tap. To be pragmatic, it's better to avoid periocular or intraocular or oral steroids, because steroids in such a setting where there's a low virulent bacterial fungus, it's a double-edged sword. A subclinical infection, steroid can push it towards a clinical infection, and which can lead to a poor prognosis. So keep a high index of suspicion for infection, do an EC tap, or refer the patient to a vitreoretinal specialist. And to sum it up, my take-home message is look at the signs of persistent inflammation, namely keratotic precipitates and the other signs that I talked about. Dilate and re-examine the patient. Look for cellular collection. A plaque is a cellular collection, vitreous beads is a cellular collection, vitreous cells is a cellular collection. Recurrence of inflammation on steroid taper is very suspicious of an infectious uveitis. There is no role of periocular, intraocular, oral steroids in this scenario. And please refer to a vitreoretinal colleague for further management as early as possible. Thank you very much.
Oh, that is fantastic. Very, very, very appropriate. The last slide was really nice. Thank you so much, Chetan. Stay on. Please don't leave.
Yeah, I'll be
there also. Thank you so much. Praveen. Praveen is up and running. Yeah. Dr. Praveen Murthy is a good friend of mine. Practices at Bangalore, and he's a phaco and PI surgeon at the Prabhai Clinic and the Vitala Institute at Bangalore. Praveen, welcome. Here you're talking about the pre-op protocol. Is it correct? I accept that this and the next topics are a little bit variable from center to center, area to area, but we will try and have a little bit of consensus over here. Praveen, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Saurav. Can you hear me?
We can see your slides and hear you well, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Saurav. Is my pre-operative protocol correct in the setting of preventing endophthalmitis? And in this thing, I would like to recall my grandfather's words. He practiced ophthalmology for 60 years. And he would say an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. A good preoperative assessment is able to pick up most sources of infection in and around the eye. But oftentimes, the signs may be very subtle and may be missed. So a proper preoperative examination is essential to pick up these sources of infection and address them before proceeding with surgery. 20% of all cataract patients are diabetic. So our emphasis should be on good and optimal blood sugar control before we embark on cataract surgery. So a random blood sugar of 200 or less and HbA1c less than 10 is what is recommended, but and I would not recommend going by urine sugars. Optimal sugar control, as previous speakers also alluded to, not only reduces the risk of endophthalmitis, but also reduces the chances of progression of diabetic retinopathy and macular edema. So here comes the physician colleague of yours. So you should optimize systemic control. And special cases are those of patients who are on dialysis, who are on antiretroviral therapy or steroids and immune modulators. Here you have to be a little more careful. Ask a proper history to elicit any dental caries, any urinary tract infections. A diabetic ulcer sometimes gets missed in our focus on the cataract. And if a patient has an indwelling catheter, be sure that you have addressed these issues before you take it up for cataract. So sac syringing has stood the test of time to find out whether the nasolacrimal duct is patent. But Rho Plus also is equally effective. And if you have regurgitation on pressure, when you press on the sac area, defer surgery, address the lacrimal sac first and then go for the surgery later. And preferably avoid doing a syringing on the day of surgery. All of us routinely prescribe preoperative broad-spectrum antibiotics. You can start 1 to 3 days prior to surgery. And as our Dr. Chetan Rao spoke just before, normal conjunctival flora is also capable of causing endophthalmitis, and putting a patient on pre-op antibiotic helps. Conjunctival swab I would reserve for a one-night patient or a patient who has recently recovered from conjunctivitis. Checklists are extremely important. So they ensure that you recheck parameters before you shift the patient to the OT. Someone should do a clinical assessment before shifting, because it's not unusual to see discharge on the morning of surgery. Hygiene protocol should be explained to the patient to have a head bath, face wash, and come for the surgery. Avoid contact procedures on the day of the surgery, and emphasize on hand hygiene. Today, it's much easier post-corona to do that. And tell them that mobile phones can be a source of infection. OT protocols should be very clear to all the OT staff. Ensure that the staff are not carriers of infection. You should have hand hygiene protocols well described. Hand washing, gowning, and gloving should be like second nature. And mobile phones, again, should be excluded from the OT. This is the most important message. What we use is, this is most effective in reducing the chances of bacterial load in and around the eye. And we use povidone iodine 5% with a contact time of 3 minutes to paint the area around the eye, and also put a drop of povidone in the conjunctival cul-de-sac and maintain it for 3 minutes to avoid or reduce the bacterial load. Povidone is bactericidal and fungicidal. Now, the OT sterilization protocols, I think each of us have different levels of sterilization, but the bare minimum is autoclaving, and ETO and plasma sterilizations are optional if you have it. Disposable sterile products, source consumables from good sources, so from reliable vendors. Have quality checks on your sources so that you have some documentation about what precautions you have taken, and have reuse and recall protocols which are well established. The AIOS has come up with a wonderful checklist which is very comprehensive. I would suggest that all of us go through it and incorporate it in letter and spirit in our practices. So finally, the take-home points are good pre-op clinical assessment, povidone, this is the best mantra that we have, good sterilization protocols, stringent quality checks, and proper documentation. Thank you very much.
End. Stop sharing. Melo.
Praveen, excellent. Very, very glad to put. And what you alluded to in the end was the AIS protocols also. I think it should be hammered home to everybody, each and every one of us. Extremely important, and it's a very well thought out Huge committees have spent lots of time and brought it out. I know that 200 sugar, 10 HbA1c is a little dicey here and there, but we have to have some numbers to it. And let's go by the AIS numbers. But thank you, Praveen. Stay on.
Thank you.
Invite my extremely important and very good friend of mine, Satish Gutiagraham. Satish is a director at the Ananda Institute in Hyderabad. We did our fellowship together at SN Chennai. Satish will be talking about the post-op part of the protocol, correct? Is it correct?
Yeah, thank you, Saurav. You can hear me?
We can hear you and see your slides,
yeah,
please.
Thank you. So I'll be talking about is my post-op protocol correct? And I think the entire discussion is about the enemy at the door. The enemy at the door here is endophthalmitis. And if you look at the central pictures, and anybody would say that they're dealing with an endophthalmitis. But if you look at the picture to the right side or to the left side, like a viral endothelitis or a TAS can be a mimic to this. And all of us want to avoid all these things. Now, if you look at the standard post-op protocol, which is generally followed, and we use a topical steroids post cataract surgery and topical antibiotics for some period of time. And sometimes there are some patients who have been treated with systemic antibiotics and other medications. But ideally, actually, post-operative antibiotics are not approved for cataract surgery. And your follow-up is, this is the standard protocol majority of us follow, day 1, day 5 to 7, the second visit, and 2 to 4 weeks later. And when in doubt, we ask them for calling for a more frequent follow-up. I think of all the factors which limit the incidence of endophthalmitis, I think the usage of perioperative povidone has definitely a level of evidence. And a very good draping with isolation of eyelids and eyelashes and a meticulous sterile operation theater preparations are definitely going to limit the incidence of endophthalmitis. But what are the factors post-operatively? So you have taken enough condition in the intraoperatively and post-operative. What are the factors which we look into? One is the usage of topical antibiotics. Then we'll look into the usage of intracameral antibiotics. And also we'll look into the usage of the systemic antibiotics. The goal of a topical antibiotic is to reduce the conjunctival bacterial load, thereby lowering the risk of intraocular contamination. But it does not have a strong evidence of support in terms of clinical this thing. So, in fact, if you look into in spite of the fact it does not have a clinical support, if you look at the ASARS survey, 97% of the people use topical antibiotics post-operatively, at least for a period of 2 weeks post-operatively. This was an interesting study from the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology with the LBP group, where they injected intracameral antibiotics in one group, and they treated with intracameral antibiotics and post-operative antibiotics, topical antibiotics, and at the end of it, they have realized that they did not have any difference in the incidence of occurrence of endophthalmitis, thereby questioning the use of post-operative topical antibiotics. Now the intracameral antibiotics have been now come into the work because of the randomized control study which was done by the ESCRS group way back in 2006. And once they published, and they have come out with a result saying that it almost decreased fivefold there is a decrease of fivefold in the rate of culture positive endophthalmitis. And the rationale for using it is, if you look at in spite of adequate preoperative and the post-operative, intraoperative aseptic protocols we follow, we have a bacterial contamination as high as 31%. And so the idea is to inject the antibiotics at the end of the surgery to kill these microbes. But remember that intracameral antibiotics are not without any complication. These are the list of the complications. And in fact, because of the compounding errors of the pharmacies, post-intracameral antibiotics, people still had endophthalmitis. Now, systemic antibiotics do have some role, and these are some of the indications where you see patients with chronic infections, immunocompromised patients, prolonged surgeries or repeat surgeries where people tend to use systemic antibiotics. Now, that was as far as the literature part of it is concerned. Now, let's see what is the practice patterns in our country right now. And this was the AAOS survey talking about the antibiotic prophylaxis in cataract surgery to prevent endophthalmitis. More than 95% of them have responded saying that they use post-operative antibiotics, and nearly 50% of them are using for a period of at least 4 weeks. Now, patching is done only if the patient is having a peripheral bulb block, and they've also said that patching is done only for few hours, and prolonged patching, there is a high risk of endophthalmitis. And if you look at this particular comparison between the American population, American group and the Indian group, and you can see that majority of them use preoperative and perioperative antibiotics, post-operative topical antibiotics. They also use intravitreal antibiotics also. But the only difference is the choice of antibiotics, and we use moxifloxacin possibly because moxifloxacin tends to cover more of a gram-negative, and that is the reason why, because in India we have more of gram-negative bacterial endophthalmitis also, and that's why the moxifloxacin is the preferred choice. And in practice, there are nearly 40% of the people who still use subconjunctival injections, and 50% of the people, close to 50% are using post-operative antibiotics. And when they ask the question, when do you use an intracameral antibiotic, majority of them said that in high-risk patients in these conditions like a PC break, prolonged surgery, or elderly individual or immunocompromised patients, they tend to use these intracameral antibiotics. Now, following the ESCRS study, the Indian group, the Sharma et al., started evaluating the intracameral cefuroxime, and they recommended to using it only in the high-risk patients. But the Arvind group, I think the Haripriya et al., once they started using the intracameral moxifloxacin, they recommended to use it routinely for every patient who's undergoing a cataract surgery. And they reported that at least threefold reduction in the incidence of endophthalmitis following the SICS, and sixfold decrease in the reduction in the occurrence of endophthalmitis following phacoemulsification. So the take-home message is, I think, it goes without saying that the perioperative use of povidone definitely has a level 1 evidence, and isolation of the eyelids and eyelashes and meticulous sterile operation theater preparations are extremely essential. Avoid a prolonged patching, that is extremely important, patients. Topical antibiotics, in spite of the fact we have a less level of evidence, but it's one of the most common practice and people are using topical antibiotics. Intracameral antibiotics are extremely gaining popularity, and probably I think we should think about using them in high-risk patients. And systemic antibiotics also have a role in a group of high-risk patients. But in order to prevent endophthalmitis and to play it safe, I think what we are actually doing is we are causing a risk of antibiotic resistance. We are increasing the risk of antibiotic resistance. That is what we need to keep in mind. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Satish. Very succinct and very nicely put. We move on to the next talk. Dr. Ruchi, are you there, please?
Yes, sir, I'm there.
Yeah. Dr. Ruchi Mattal is a senior veterinary consultant at LG Eye Institute in Ambala. She had done a fellowship 20 years back at Shankaracharyya in Chennai. I welcome Dr. Ruchi, please. She has a very important topic on, do I restructure my OT? There will be a little overlap here. She's recently got an NABH accreditation, so we asked her to talk about this. She's bubbling with knowledge about OT restructuring. Dr. Ruchi, please go ahead.
So these are nightmare. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity. So this is something which we don't want. And so what do we do this? So incidence of surgical infection.
Sorry, ma'am, I interrupt you, ma'am. Please put on slideshow, ma'am.
1 second. I thought. 1 second, please.
Right side, niche.
Not getting.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, ma'am.
1 second. Yes.
Yeah,
sorry for sorry. So methods, designing of the OT, efficiency, human element, and equipment. So I'll be just touching upon the 2 points like designing of the OT and equipment part. So this is a standard OT layout. We should know very well that the entry for the patient and the OT staff or surgeon should be completely separate. Modular operation theater is not a mandatory requirement, though these guidelines are desirable under all, guidelines are desirable under all programs, but these are not mandatory for implementing a pre-entry level certification standard. Now, as per the NABH guidelines, ophthalmic OTs fall in the category of type B. The air changes recommended per hour are 20 with involving 4 fresh air changes. Air velocity should be 25 to 35 feet per minute, and it should be unidirectional and downward towards the OT table. The minimum positive pressure recommended is 2.5 pascals, and the air handling unit, which is an air purification unit, and it is also an air filtration unit. It must have 2 sets of washable flange type filters. Now, temperature and humidity again are very important. The temperature should be maintained at 21 plus minus 3 degrees Celsius inside the OT at all times, and relative humidity between 20 to 60%. And remember, we should have appropriate devices to monitor and display these conditions inside the OT. Now, there is no size restriction of OR in case of remodeling, but then there should be sufficient space for the movement of the staff and enough for the movement. OT should be placed in upper floors of the building. It should not be facing busy roads, usually cut off from the human traffic. Dedicated AHU should be there for one single OT. That means there should not be share between the two OTs. Window or split ACs are not recommended in the OR, and the flooring should be preferably anti-static vinyl flooring. The wall should be porous, non-porous, hard with minimal joints. There shouldn't be any sharp curves. Prefer to paint with milder tones, and inbuilt electrical fittings are recommended. That is, avoid hanging wires in the OR. Now, for old constructions and for retrofitting, where space is a constraint, ceiling suspended AHU is permitted, where there is accessibility for maintenance of filters and other parts of the AHU. Now, other points which should be emphasized, which are the causes for post-op infection, they are the normal flora, instruments, hand, solutions, linen. So these are also important, not only the OT. Now, OR protocols should be strict and stringent, like clean room environment in OR, disinfection of instruments and equipments, personal hygiene, and avoid maximum number of people in the OT during the theater moving. Now, discipline at every step in OR is important. Coming to the sterilization, proper packing, loading is recommended. Package should be properly dated, name of the package, load number. Then we should know that if the package has been autoclaved, after 48 hours, it needs re-autoclaving if it has not been used. Then reject the instruments which have showing poor cleaning, debris or deposits, and reject the fluids with particles. These are the indicators which we use for the testing the efficacy of autoclaves. Now, biomedical waste segregation is again a very important thing, and which has also been emphasized in the NABH guidelines for OR. Now, systematic surveillance is very important if we want to avoid any untoward events in the OR. And we need to monitor if our protocols are being properly followed or not. Do not take anything for granted, and documentation is the backbone for this. For this, microbiological surveillances are very important. It should be done before the initiation of a new OR, or you have renovated your OR. It should be done when there is an outbreak of post-operative infection. It's also useful for doing it, because for legal purposes, and generally we do once a month. Now, microbiological surveillance of air. This is also very important. What we can do is we can keep the blood agar, Savarod and dextror agar plates on the OR table exposed for 30 minutes, then close and seal and send it for the microbiological testing. For samples to be taken, they should be from the OT table, microscope handles, instrument trolley, AC ducts, autoclave, and the water which we are using for scrub. Now, these are other surveillance forms which we can make for our own hospitals. These are actually sort of internal audits to keep a check that how your OT protocols are being properly followed or not. Now, coming to the instruments getting ready for surgery. This is a very small video to show how the instrument should be properly packed and used before OT. After completing the case, we should keep the instruments back, and then we have to transfer the soil instruments to the hatch box. This is the operating room side of the hatch box, taking out from the non-sterile corridor, and then we have to clean them. And we use the aseptic solutions for cleaning these instruments. Brushes can be used to properly clean the instrument. These steps are very important. Each and every step of cleaning, packing, autoclaving is very important if we want to prevent any untoward event. Now, these are cleaned in running water once, and then they are transferred to the CSST, where they are cleaned in distilled water. After cleaning, they are properly dried. We can use even hair dryers to dry these instruments. After this comes packing. The packing of the instrument is done, and then we keep a chemical indicator in our pack, and then properly fold. These folding and these type of packing is again very important. And we have to make an internal audit to see all these things also, whether these are being done properly or not. So properly labeled, and then they are being kept into the autoclave. And the timer is set. So after the autoclaving, the important thing which I want to emphasize is the autoclave register. This is very important. Every detail should be mentioned in this register, because we cannot trace anything if anything goes wrong if it is not being documented. So this is a very important thing. After the autoclaving is done, we take out the instruments back. And then the instruments are being, this packed has been transferred to the OR for their use. So the take-home message is, everything should be documented properly. Documentation is the backbone. OT protocol should be strictly followed to prevent any untoward event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ruchi. I think that was a lovely presentation and absolutely on time, bang on time. Thank you so much. If you can unshare your slide, please.
Yes, sir. I'm just.
Yeah, thank you. Is Dr. Kim sir there?
Arav?
Yes, Saurav.
Yeah. Ruchi, please, you mute yourself. Arav, can we call after? Yeah. Sir, I'll stick to you. Is Deepak there? Dr. Deepak?
No, no, sir.
He's not there. So, sir, you are the only person to help me out on this.
Oh, no, we just, I mean, all the speakers did a wonderful job, starting from Basu. They brought out all the important, I mean, this is a very, very important topic. I thought there will be a lot of attendees for this, especially, you know, this is one dreading complication that everybody wants to understand and know how to manage, especially, you know, understanding or recognizing the problem, especially what Basu mentioned about TAS versus infective endophthalmitis. I think that's a very, very important point that he brought out. So, Basu, you did mention about fully dilating pupil. A pupil which dilates very well is definitely a sign that goes against an infective endophthalmitis. Is that right?
Sir, he's moved on to the next. He's got a UVAT session going on. So we'll have to do without him, sir.
Okay, no problem. I thought that, so those are some of the things that we need to understand. And Saurav, I'll let you ask the questions and we can.
No, sir, let me make it easy for you. The first talk, in your opinion, for a person practicing way inside away from Madurai or way inside from Calcutta away from me, 200 kilometers away from me, is an ultrasound necessary to diagnose or treat an endophthalmitis?
Not if he doesn't have endophthalmitis ultrasound is not a must. If you have it, definitely it helps. But definitely as an anti-segment practitioner, they may not have it. And I don't think it is a must to have it. There is, as I said, you know, as also mentioned by Basu and Dr. Jain, that it's a more of a clinical diagnosis. Ultrasound is only an adjuvant. You stressed on it. I agree that it's only adjuvant. If you have it, well and good. If you don't have it, you still go ahead with the diagnosis of endophthalmitis. You err on the side of endophthalmitis.
Supposing our colleague in a small town, and he himself is the senior most practitioner there, has an endophthalmitis, patient does not want to leave town, has full faith in him, would you suggest that yes, he should take an AC tab, talk to his microbiologist, send the sample over, or should he always have to do a vitreous tab?
No, I mean, if he's well versed, a senior person, yes, doing a vitreous tab would definitely help. But if he's not comfortable with it, I would suggest at least an AC tab would help making the diagnosis. The patient is not willing to leave, and then that will give you an idea of what the microorganism could be.
Right. So I think these are important take-home points that patient doesn't want to go has faith. Dr. Saab, Satish wants to say something. Satish, go ahead, please.
Saurav, I have a question here. Some of the anterior segment surgeons have this question. They call me up, sir, I see a membrane on the surface of the IVOL. I see an hypopion. Can I do an AC wash and send the sample and then give an intravitreal injection? So I just wanted the panel to answer this. Should we recommend them to do an AC wash? Because they say that is going to improve the vision. So should we tell the anterior segment surgeons that do an AC wash instead of doing a simple tap, or directly send it to a retinal surgeon?
I will not answer the question directly. I will put it the other way around. This is an infection and it needs an antibiotic. I repeat my statement again. This is an infection and needs antibiotic. Similarly, we'll have very senior colleagues telling us end-off has occurred, do a VIT. So I repeat again, vitrectomy is not the answer for a endophthalmitis. It is identifying the organism and instilling an appropriate antibiotic intravitreal. I think is the answer for this. An AC wash will not harm the patient, but it is not the treatment. And AC tap with the intravitreal injection, and I keep insisting this, if you can put in 2 hands, side entry, dialer, all these things, there is no harm going 3 meters behind and having those microphaco and all those lovely keratomes 3.2, 4.2. I think you can go just 3 meters behind and give an injection. The retina will not jump up suddenly into your needle. So I would insist on just an AC tap, send the sample, AC wash not necessary, and give an intravitreal injection. Dr. Kim, sir, your opinion on that?
With you, Dr. Saurav, because one, being aggressive and creating more inflammation is not a good idea. I think keep it as minimal, just injecting with the antibiotic and leaving it at that would be better than going for a AC wash again.
Saurav, can I make a point, Saurav?
Preetham, please.
Quick point. I think when it comes to the anterior segment persons, everybody's level of. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Preetham.
So everybody's level of competency will be different. Someone may be competent enough to take an AC tap and give an intravitreal injection. Someone may not be confident to give an intravitreal injection. I think what I always tell some of my students is, in case of endophthalmitis, the error of omission is worse than the error of commission. If you're not doing anything and sitting on it, I think that's the worst you've done for your patient. So if you're in doubt, if you're not able to do something, then I think you should refer it.
I totally agree with you. I believe Dr. Mundithar has joined us. Is Dr. Mundithar there, sir?
Yes, yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm really sorry.
Welcome, sir.
I could not join you earlier because I was in another hall and I could not, finish the commitment and join you. Thanks. Sorry, very sorry for that. Just adding to this whole thing, what you brought out.
I'll just stop you in between. Since virtual, we'll believe you. If it was not virtual, I would have said, sir, by chai pine kahin ruk gaya hai. Please go ahead, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the answer to your question first, I said somebody said about AC wash and then give intravitreal injection. As Kim said, there is no point in meddling with the eye. If at all you want to do anything, just do an AC tap and give an intravitreal injection. Washing the AC does not give you any additional, benefit to the eye. It only adds to the damage and, does not give you any more benefit. And doing an AC tap is good enough. You don't have to wash the AC and send the sample. You take an AC tap and send the sample. And Preetham, you are telling about the competency. I believe every ophthalmologist should be competent to give an intravitreal injection.
Absolutely.
It's not a rocket science. I mean, it's a basic thing like giving a subconjunctival injection.
No doubt.
So I think we should make sure that we train all our colleagues to give an intravitreal injection, whether it's an antibiotic. I'm sure we can do that. That's not definitely it's a skill that is not so difficult. We train our fellows in 1 month's time to give intravitreal injection, isn't it? So
I agree with you, sir. Novartis, I'm taking names right now. Novartis had this while they were doing these training programs for the young ophthalmologists to do these intravitreal injections for eccentrics. So I would tell them jokingly, now that you know how to give this, please the intravitreal antibiotic also next time if you feel it's necessary.
That's the incentive to learn.
The incentive to learn is both. I will move on to Dr. Muralidhar sir, we had 2 talks on pre and post-op protocols, and I believe you all joined us late, but any comments, any recommendations for pre-op and post-op protocols that you would like to make?
I'm sorry, I didn't listen to those talks, so I can't really say whether anything else I can add. But probably in these COVID times, I don't know what is the pre-op protocol that all of you discussed. Was that included, like COVID testing?
No, sir.
Prior
We've not talked about specific surgery. Okay, let me ask you a specific question, sir. Let me ask you a specific question. What is your opinion on intracameral antibiotics? Because after you will ask Dr. Kim this, and they have the world's largest study on that. So be very careful what you tell us. So what is your personal take on intracameral antibiotics that the anti-Semitic surgeons want to feel comfortable about at the end of your phaco surgery, excellent phaco surgery?
I believe that if you look at the whole the science, it is not. I'm not in favor of giving an intracameral antibiotics at the end of cataract surgery. I'm not in favor. So because you're going to treat a large number of eyes, you're going to inject in a large number of eyes. The possibility of organisms developing resistance to the antibiotic is there. And thirdly, antibiotic-induced damage. We've been giving vancomycin for a number of years, but the direct complication of hemorrhagic occlusive retinal vasculitis came to light only now when we started using it in large number of eyes. So for all these reasons, and for actually scientific reason, I think asepsis is always better than antisepsis.
I agree.
Asepsis course any day over antisepsis. So all these reasons combined, I am not in favor of a intracameral injection as a routine.
Dr. Kim, sir, your take on that?
Saurav, you're trying to create a debate around here. No. No, I was just wanted to say, Dr. Muralidhar, when you're talking about antibiotic resistance, it's not that we don't use antibiotics post-operatively. Everybody uses post-operative antibiotics, even though it's topical antibiotics, it's still there. So talking about antibiotic resistance, I'm not sure whether it makes a difference because you're given an intracameral antibiotic. And also for us, because there's a clear evidence we have seen pre and post intracameral antibiotics, we have had a huge drop in our, as was mentioned, there's been a huge drop in our post-op endophthalmitis in all sectors, be it.
I think there's 21,000 eyes, sir, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
21,000 eyes. No, I've just got a message saying that we have the quiz to end the day. So we'll have to ask Dr. Deepti Kulkarni to please join us, and we have only 5 minutes to finish the session. Is Dr. Deepti there, please?
I'm here, sir. And quick.
She has some really fantastic questions, and I am keeping my mouth shut on that. Please share a slide, please.
Yes, sir. Why can't I find the share? Yes, sir, got it.
This quiz is for the delegates or for the panelists and all the presenters?
For everybody, sir. For everybody.
It is more like question and answer. I won't trouble all the already troubled audience for the rest of the day. These are just a set of few question and answers which should help us get some take-home messages. First is, what solution is recommended for cleaning the instruments before we sterilize them? Normal saline, sorry for the typo there, balanced salt solution, distilled water, or bacillocid solution? And the answer is distilled water. There's a lot of postgraduates with whom I discussed this question yesterday somehow interestingly answered balanced salt solution, and I couldn't realize why they thought so. The basic idea here is to avoid any kind of salts being deposited on our instruments before we sterilize them, especially those with lumens tend to have these salts deposition and which become anhydrous for infection when they are reused again. The next question, what is the strength of povidone iodine eye drops that we use as a prophylaxis before surgical procedures? 2.5%, 5%, 10%, or 7.5%? The answer is 5%. In this regard, there is this very interesting article about the timing of application. All of us have discussed the importance of the betadine eye drops before surgery, but the timing also is crucial. After placing the speculum, use of betadine drops decreases the endophthalmitis rate by 7-fold. Now, although this study applies to intravitreal injection, I'm sure we can extrapolate it on some level to even other intraocular procedures as well. So what is the minimum aeration time that needs to be given before ETO-sterilized instruments are used? This also has had various study reports, 4 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, or 24 hours. The right answer here is 24 hours, although some companies do recommend 12 to 24 hours. There have been various studies where first of all, the concentration that we must follow is 50 parts. And for this concentration to be achieved, it takes on an average 1 to 5 days. So the safest bet is to go for 72 hours at least before, especially for those instruments where there is a lumen, where we are going to reuse it. But the minimum requirement time is of 24 hours. The next question is, what is the gold standard for monitoring of our sterilization? We know we check if the sterilization using the chemical strip or chemical indicators or the strip that we place on the outside of our sets when we sterilize. But how do we monitor our sterilization? The answer here is a biological indicator. What should be the frequency? NABH does recommend weekly evaluation, although based on the study load, weekly, fortnightly, or monthly can be done, but weekly and fortnightly are the most recommended in most guidelines that I could come across. This is probably the last question. What are the recommended OTA changes? Ma'am has clearly said that we need a minimum of 20 total air changes, of which 4 should be total air exchanges. If we suspect endophthalmitis, what is the most crucial step? This I just added after the previous discussion. Half-hourly topicals, IV antibiotics. Should we step up the steroids or intravitreal antibiotics? This is especially relevant for people who are probably practicing in 2-tier, 3-tier places, or even in the rural settings where they have to refer the patient to some other town or city. What should be done? The most crucial step here is intravitreal antibiotics, and like all the seniors here pointed out, it is very essential that this be taught to postgraduates, like how we learned to while doing our PG about how to give an intravitreal injection. This will go a long way in helping us preserve vision in patients where we need them. So intravitreal injections, antibiotics are the first and most important step, even if we suspect an endophthalmitis. Thank you. Thank you, Saurav.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Deepti. So nice of you for adding the last question also and making it very clear to all of us. Yes, I'll take last comments from Dr. Kim, sir. Anything overall you would like to say about this whole session?
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful, interesting session. All the speakers gave a very excellent presentation on the basics of the endophthalmitis day 1, day 3, and day 6. I think that covered all. I want to thank everybody for the presentation. It's good learning for us also.
Dr. Murli, sir, anything? Murli, sir, is there?
Murli, sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Saurav. I think I missed out a good session. Very good topics. I was really looking forward to this, but somehow got caught in another hall. And I had asked for a last minute change, and this is what landed me in this. Thanks to Partha and Saurav Sinha and the team for giving me this opportunity. I'm sure Kim managed the show quite well. With him around, I had no problem. I thought, okay, he's going to manage.
Saurav's show.
Actually, what happened was today was the actual 25th anniversary of our institute, Retina Institute of Karnataka. So
congratulations, sir. Congratulations.
We had a small function.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. So we had a small function at about 2 o'clock, and that was clashing with one session. And I exchanged, and I landed up in this situation where I had to miss this session.
So party dura, sir. We will have a meeting in Bangalore at some point.
Definitely, definitely. Once the corona goes, we will have a party.
Definitely.
Otherwise, we are having a virtual celebration next month. We're trying to have one. And request all of you to join us in the celebration. We will send out the details. Kim is also part of our faculty for that
I am
session.
a proud RIK
And
product.
Deepthi will be there. And July 10th and 11th, we have 2-day webinar, 6 to 9 p.m. One day on medical retina imaging of the retina, and second day on surgical retina challenges. We will circulate information about the meeting widely, and please all of you do join in our celebrations. I'm sure it will be a very useful and a very interesting session, and it will be nice to have all the retina fraternity of the country with us in this celebration. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation, sir. Last but not the least, I must thank Preetham, who has really helped me with this over here. I pulled him into this last minute. Preetham and we go back to our fellowship days together, and he helped me manage these 3 sessions, and we've formed these groups. And I asked Dr. Partho, why is it that only Retina Specialty Day has this special flyer going out, 2 weeks before the whole thing? Because you guys are the only guys working hard. Other specialty days are not working hard to make this happen. So Preetham, thank you so much. Thank you for helping with the whole thing.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Right.
But who's going to thank the man? Who's going to thank you? So,
yes,
so
I'm there to thank him. I'm there to thank him.
Yeah, it's good. I can't say standing ovations, but a show of hands from everyone.
Why you're scared to stand? Preetham, you're scared to stand?
I'm wearing my cycling shorts.
Okay.
Thank you, Patida. Thank you, Dr. Partho, for your opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Saurav and Preetham, they took it forward. They designed everything. They got you guys on, and they kept you in the grip. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.